Intrigued by Rowan Atkinson.
Yeah, he's my favourite.
He is
Mr. Bean. I always forget how he sounds like, because always when you're watching him in Mr. Bean, he's just mumbling.
He doesn't say anything really,
but now he's used his voice to attack cancel culture for comedians.
Rowan Atkinson, the man who made us laugh with Mr. Bean, has just turned the tables on Labour leader Keir Starmer in a way that no one saw coming. In a fiery speech, Atkinson ripped into the absurdity of modern censorship laws, bringing up ridiculous cases like a man arrested for calling a police horse gay. Starmer, with his stance on curbing offensive speech, was left humiliated as Atkinson exposed the flaws in these policies. If even the mildest remarks can get you arrested, what does that mean for free speech in the UK? Rowan Atkinson is much more than just a comedian known for characters like Mr. Bean. Over the years, he has emerged as a passionate advocate for free speech, consistently speaking out against censorship. Atkinson's stance on free expression stems from a belief that the right to speak freely, even if it offends, is critical to a healthy society. He's long warned about the dangers of over-policing what people say and how laws intended to curb offensive speech can easily become tools for stifling opinions and silencing dissent.
Vehicles. The sale of EVs in the UK has slowed down so much the government has halved its sales forecasts. Now, the government had planned that by 2027...
One of his most notable efforts was his involvement in the Reform Section 5 campaign. Section 5 of the Public Order Act in the UK allowed the police to arrest people for making remarks that could be deemed insulting, even if no harm was caused. Atkinson saw this as a direct attack on free speech, arguing that it gave authorities far too much leeway to decide what could be considered offensive. He campaigned tirelessly to highlight the absurdity of this law, emphasising that no one should be arrested simply because someone else took offence at what they said. His role in helping to reform this law cemented his reputation as a defender of free expression.
Because of the undoubtedly privileged position that is afforded to those of a high public profile. So my concerns are less for myself and more for those more vulnerable because of their lower profile.
Atkinson has often criticised what he calls the outrage industry, where certain individuals or groups stir up public anger to suppress speech they find distasteful. He points to examples like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay, or the teenager arrested for calling Scientology a cult. These cases, according to Atkinson, represent a dangerous overreach by the authorities. His concern is that laws meant to protect society from offensive remarks are instead criminalising trivial, even absurd behaviour.
They love soccer. It's been said Keir Starmer is such a fanatic, he actually has to play it down. Starmer tries to play football here with his friends every week, but that now could prove to be a lot more difficult than it was as opposition leader or...
Keir Starmer, as the leader of the Labour Party, has consistently emphasised the need to balance free speech with the protection of vulnerable groups from hate speech. He's positioned himself as someone who supports robust public debate, but also advocates for laws that prevent the spread of harmful or insightful language. Starmer's legal background as a former director of public prosecutions has influenced his approach to this delicate balance. He believes in curbing speech that can fuel hate, violence, or discrimination, while still preserving people's right to voice their opinions.
So Keir set out to drag the Labour Party back to the centre when he became leader.
It is the honour and the privilege of my life to be elected as leader of the Labour Party.
Under Starmer's leadership, the Labour Party has promoted policies that target harmful speech, particularly online, where the spread of misinformation and hate speech has become a growing concern. Starmer has been vocal about cracking down on abuse, especially on social media platforms, where vulnerable individuals, such as minorities or marginalised communities, are often targeted. In his view, failing to regulate harmful speech could lead to a more divided and unsafe society. This position, however, doesn't sit well with advocates like Rowan Atkinson, who feel that such policies might go too far and suppress legitimate debate. From Atkinson's perspective, the push to curb hate speech is understandable, but it risks overstepping by penalising speech that is merely insulting or unpopular. Atkinson argues that laws aimed at curbing offensive language often leave too much room for interpretation, allowing authorities to determine what qualifies as insulting or harmful. This could lead to innocent people being prosecuted simply for expressing a view that doesn't align with the prevailing political or social orthodoxy. Rowan Atkinson has always been a vocal advocate for free speech, and his recent remarks highlight some bizarre and alarming cases where individuals faced arrest for actions that most of us would consider harmless or trivial. One of the most absurd examples he brings up is the infamous gay horse incident in Oxford. In this case, a man was arrested for calling a police horse gay. It's hard to imagine how something like this could lead to legal action, but that's exactly what happened. The man's comment was treated as offensive, and the police decided to take him into custody. Atkinson points to this incident as a clear example of overzealous policing, where the law is applied in a way that feels completely disconnected from common sense. In his view, such cases demonstrate an abuse of power, where the authorities are becoming overly sensitive to harmless remarks, ultimately stifling free speech in the process.
And that the Scientology case was also dropped at some point during the court process was proof that the law was working well, ignoring the fact that the only reason these cases were dropped was because of the publicity.
Another striking case that Atkinson highlights is the teenager who was arrested for holding a sign that called the Church of Scientology a cult. Scientology is often a subject of debate, with many people criticising its practices and labelling it a cult. However, in this instance, the young protester's critique was treated as an actionable offence, and the police intervened. The teenager was arrested for what should have been protected speech, expressing a critical opinion about a religious organisation. Atkinson uses this case to show how the line between legitimate critique and illegal speech has become blurred, especially when it comes to controversial or powerful institutions. He argues that criticising a religion or calling it names should not be grounds for legal action. Instead, these kinds of statements should fall under the protection of free expression, even if they offend some people.
The 9 o'clock news some years ago, and we did a sketch where Griff Rhys-Jones played Constable Savage, a manifestly racist police officer to whom I, as his station commander, is giving a dressing down.
Atkinson also reflects on his earlier work, referencing comedy sketches from Not the 9 o'clock News, where absurd arrests were a punchline. The show once featured a fictional police officer arresting a man for ridiculous offences like walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area. At the time, these sketches were meant to be satire, poking fun at the idea of oppressive and unreasonable law enforcement. But as Atkinson points out, life seems to be imitating art today. Incidents like the gay horse arrest feel like they've stepped straight out of one of those old comedy skits. Only this time, it's real. Atkinson argues that such laws, when misused, can have a chilling effect on ordinary people. Those who don't have the platform or visibility of a celebrity are left vulnerable to prosecution, unable to defend themselves from overreaching authorities. For Atkinson, these cases highlight the urgent need to rethink how we balance free speech with the desire to curb offensive behaviour.
To attract media attention. Even for those actions that were withdrawn, people were arrested, questioned, taken to court, and then released. That isn't a law working properly.
At the heart of Rowan Atkinson's argument is his critique of Section 5 of the Public Order Act, a controversial piece of legislation that has been used to prosecute individuals for making insulting remarks. Section 5 has been around for decades, but it has increasingly been applied to cases that many people find trivial or absurd, such as the ones Atkinson highlighted. Historically, the law was intended to protect public order by allowing authorities to intervene when speech or behaviour became threatening. However, over time, the scope of what constitutes an insult has expanded, leaving too much room for subjective interpretation. Atkinson argues that it's time to reconsider how this law is used and whether the definition of insult or offence needs to be reined in. He believes that people should not be arrested for making comments that, while perhaps offensive to some, are harmless in the grand scheme of things. The problem, as Atkinson sees it, goes beyond the legal framework and touches on a broader cultural shift towards censorship. Over the last few years, there has been a growing tendency to silence dissenting voices, not through debate, but by labelling them as offensive or harmful. This trend, according to Atkinson, reflects a society that is increasingly intolerant of views that challenge the mainstream. He sees this shift as particularly dangerous because it stifles open conversation and prevents people from engaging with ideas that make them uncomfortable. Instead of fostering an environment where different opinions can be debated and discussed, the focus has shifted towards shutting down those who hold unpopular or controversial views.
And I could tell after a while I had to bring the conversation to a close because clearly not only was he not believing me, but he was getting quite annoyed that I was pursuing this line of I am Rowan Atkinson and clearly he thought I was this total arse.
Atkinson has coined the term new intolerance to describe this cultural shift. In his view, we are living in a time when people claim to be intolerant only of intolerance, which sounds reasonable at first. But upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that this attitude often leads to replacing one form of intolerance with another. By refusing to allow offensive or challenging speech, society is, in effect, suppressing critique and dialogue. Atkinson argues that this new form of censorship is just as dangerous as the old. It doesn't allow for genuine progress or understanding because it silences those with dissenting opinions rather than engaging with them. Rowan Atkinson's clash with Keir Starmer over free speech touches on a much larger issue that is central to the current political climate in the UK. Atkinson's comments are more than just the musings of a celebrity. They tap into a broader public concern about the balance between free speech and the growing pressure to regulate it in the name of protecting vulnerable groups. The UK has been witnessing an ongoing debate about where to draw the line between safeguarding individuals from hate speech and maintaining the right to express unpopular or offensive opinions. This issue has become increasingly relevant under Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party, which has taken a firm stance on curbing hate speech, particularly online. However, figures like Atkinson view these efforts as potential threats to free expression, accusing the government of overreach. In today's political context, where populism and political correctness are constantly clashing, Atkinson's remarks strike a chord with a significant part of the public. Many people feel that their freedom to express opinions, especially controversial ones, is being stifled by overly sensitive policies. Labour, under Starmer, has focused on creating laws that curb harmful speech, but Atkinson's concern is that these laws can too easily be applied to trivial situations, leading to the kind of absurd arrests he has highlighted, such as the gay horse case. While the intention of these laws may be noble, their execution sometimes paints a picture of an increasingly authoritarian society. Atkinson's public statements push the conversation to a critical point. Do these laws actually serve the public, or are they merely tools to police speech and discourage dissent?
Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay, or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult, or the cafe owner arrested for displaying...
For Starmer, this presents a tricky situation. On the one hand, his party's stance on controlling hate speech is important for addressing legitimate concerns about online abuse, racism, and other forms of harmful behaviour. On the other hand, being seen as too restrictive on free speech could damage Labour's appeal. especially to those who value open debate and fear censorship. Starmer will likely have to address Atkinson's criticisms if he wants to avoid appearing authoritarian, particularly as Atkinson is not alone in his views. Many people across the political spectrum share concerns about the erosion of free speech, and this has the potential to impact public opinion, especially among more libertarian-minded voters. Starmer might need to clarify how his policies would balance protection from harm with maintaining robust public discourse. Public opinion is heavily influenced by high-profile figures like Rowan Atkinson. His involvement in the free speech debate, especially when delivered through memorable speeches or interviews, holds weight because it resonates with ordinary people. When a well-known figure like Atkinson takes a stand on an issue, it forces people to confront their views on the matter. For many, his examples of seemingly ridiculous arrests highlight the dangers of over-policing speech. Atkinson's influence can shift the narrative around free speech, making it more than just a legal issue but a cultural one as well. In a political landscape where the debate over political correctness, security, and free expression is intensifying, his voice amplifies the concern that some parts of society are leaning too heavily towards censorship.